A lot has happened this week. Not only with us, but also out there. I'm sure many of you have heard about the whole admissions scandal with the colleges. And I gotta tell you, I actually think it's a really good thing because I think it's gonna shape college education in a way that it's needed to be shaped for a long time. And that's what I'm praying for, because I would love to be able to afford college for my kids. But I think it's all part and parcel of what's taking place. And I think there's a lot of, sometimes you have a sore and it's infected. You gotta get that infection out before that sore can start to heal. And so I think we can look at it two ways. We can look at it and say, well, our country is going down the tubes. Or we can say, nah, we're getting the infection out, And I think that's the attitude we have to have, because attitude really is going to determine what goes on in the future. We can be angry and critical, or we can be encouraging and truthful. There was an article in 2017, USA Today. They reported that in an online survey of 1,000 adults, quote, 3/4 of Americans believe the country was better off in the 80s than now. What was really enlightening about this poll is that some of those who answered in the affirmative, they weren't even alive in the 1980s. But isn't that interesting? How in the world can somebody who was born 3 decades later believe that their parents were better off 30 years ago than they are today? And I think the answer is actually pretty simple. Their parents or other adults shared stories about their life in the 1980s. Stories that created very vivid and long-lasting images in their minds. Movies that they played over and over in their minds, which brought them to their emotional conclusion. And, I've done that with my dad. Life with my dad. My dad shared stories with me as I grew up. Some good, some not so good. Some he probably shouldn't have shared with me. Some he probably should have, and I should have listened to. Interestingly, one of those things that I know that shaped my father's life was World War II, which he served for numerous years as a staff sergeant. And I would always beg him to share some of his war stories with me. When I was a kid, we would go out in the neighborhood and in the woods and we would play war. That's what we did. A stick was a gun, and that's kind of the way I grew up. And so I would always want to hear these stories from my father. And every time I did, I tried to get him to open up and share a war story with me. His reply was always the same. He'd look at me and say, I've seen enough of guns to last my lifetime. And he would always say it with a hint of disgust and hurt, and that would be the end of it. He would change the subject. And as I got older, he would reminisce a little bit more with me. And to say that those times he opened up about the war were great would be a lie. It actually hurt me to get a small glimpse of what he went through. I could tell when he did share some of the more grotesque stories, and they were. He would catch himself and he would just, I can just close my eyes and I picture him sitting in his chair going, war is bad, there's nothing good about it, and I hope you never have to deal with it. It wasn't until after he died that I found out certain things about him in the Army in my 50s that I realized he protected me as a young boy. You see, He was my 6'5" hero growing up. Now as an adult, he's my 30-foot hero. He spared my mind the horror of having to share those heartbreaking stories with me. And they would have stuck with me, you see, right? They would have stuck with me. I would have played that movie over and over and over in my mind. And he knew that somehow, and he never shared it with me. You know, when I was a kid, I watched a movie one time with one of my older sister. She's 6 years older than me. I guess they thought it would be fun to scare me, and they did. So we watched this movie, I don't even know, I think it was, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark or something. I mean, we're talking years ago, right? And in the movie, there was these little midget guys midget demon guys that lived up in the attic. Now, for a lot of people, that's not a big deal, but see, the attic door was in my bedroom. And so my sister had me watch this movie with her, and these little demon midget guys, they caused me for the next 15 years to have a phobia of little people. And I kid you not, I can remember walking down the streets in Bergenfield, New Jersey, where I was raised, and it was the first time I saw a little person, and they were on the same side of the street that I was. I had to cross over on the other side, and I was petrified to look at them as I walked by because of this phobia that I had. I was petrified. Now, of course, I feel a little bit embarrassed about that now, but the fear was very real. I mean, my heart would start beating, I would be almost paralyzed. And I think the reason why is because that movie that I watched, it kept playing in my mind. And I would play it over and over, and it just enhanced this phobia. I've shared stories with my kids, like my dad with me, and some I regret, and I hope they forget. Some I hope they never forget. But our minds are amazing things that God has created. And that's why we have such strong emotional responses when we watch movies. And especially the movies, now listen to me, especially the movies that we play here, not the movies that we play on the screen. We play movies over and over in our heads. Those are the ones that can hurt us or help us. So what movies do you have playing in your head? Now, think about this from a scriptural point. Do you think it's a coincidence that Jesus said in Matthew 5:28, listen, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Do you see the movie that's playing over in that guy's head? Jesus says, in the kingdom of heaven where I come from, you're guilty of adultery when you allow that type of movie to play in your head. And we as guys, we need to get a hold of that, because sometimes we don't stop and think about what we're thinking. It just clicks. And we don't intentionally block it out. We just allow it to play. But you girls, the same principle applies. Why do you think several years ago there was a book that was called 50 Shades of Grey, and it became a bestseller among women? It's described by a lot of psychologists as porn for women. Guys are turning on the site, women by thought and touch, and the person who thinks about committing adultery is guilty, as Jesus is saying, before he or she even actually commits the act. And that teaching of Christ goes against a lot of the popular thinking that we have today. And yet, when you play that movie over and over and over in your minds, sooner or later it leads to action. But let's do a little experiment, okay? I want you all to just close your eyes. Go ahead. Now, I want you to remember the last time you drove near a bakery and you smelled that aroma of the freshly baked breads and rolls and pastries. The smell is captivating. It's inviting you in. It's caused a movie in your head. Now, I want you to think about buying one of those nice loaves of bread that is still warm. You know that? And I want you to cut it in half and cut a little piece out and put a nice pat of butter on it. And, take a bite. Isn't that wonderful? You can almost feel it. You can open your eyes. But that movie plays in your head, doesn't it? It plays in your head, especially if you've ever done that. Yeah, that bread. I used to do that all the time. My dad would make loaves of bread, and me and my friends would come home after, and we'd have this nice loaf that just came out of the oven, and we'd cut it in half, and I'd give half to him, and I'd take half, and we'd slap on the butter, and it was the most amazing thing. That's a movie that we've created in our lives. That's kind of what happens with us. And this is what Jesus is describing in Matthew chapter 5. The person who commits adultery has mentally gone ahead. They've undressed a woman or a man, is in bed with them, is in the process of committing this bad behavior without removing a single stitch of clothing. And that is why pornography is a multi-billion-dollar business. According to Forbes, bigger than Hollywood and bigger than sports. And it's not going to change, because that's a movie that so many allow playing in their heads. Its power has bitten a lot of us in all its different forms, and this is the power of our imaginations. All the movies you allow to play in your mind will have the potential to impact your emotions and to produce some kind of physical response if you allow them to continue to play uninterrupted. And it isn't just the lust of the flesh, it's vengeance, it's anger, it's manipulation, it's power, it's money, it's popularity. These are all things that we allow to play in our minds. You can pick the sin, but the battle is here in our minds. First book of the Bible, Genesis, and the passage that we're at right now. In Genesis chapter 3, I want to backtrack just a little bit. It creates a movie. Satan creates a movie for Eve. You remember the original sin, right? So let me read it. Genesis, actually, chapter 2, verse 17. It says, "But you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die." Now, that's what God said to Eve. Now look at verse 6 of chapter 3. This is where Satan is tempting her. "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise." Can you see it playing? It's playing in her head. There's the movie. "She took some of the fruit and ate it, and gave also some to her husband who was with her, and he ate too." So notice those words used to show Eve responses to this movie that's playing, that's created in her head. I saw, it was pleasant. I desired it. All those words have an emotional component to them. And in Genesis chapter 6, God describes the source of this movie, that it caused depravity eventually. It caused evilness that sort of reigned unchecked in the human race right before the flood, Noah and the flood. So look at verse 5 of Genesis chapter 6. All right, you ready? And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now this is King James Version, but I love the way King James Version uses the word imagination. But you following? The movie that's playing in their head, that's built there because of their imagination, that movie is evil all the time. The imaginations of the people created these movies, and they carried it out and allowed it to play uninterrupted, and it caused horrific and devastating results because they eventually acted out what was playing here. And if we read and if we continue to read that same chapter, verses 11, 12, and 13, it says this, and the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Did everyone have evil thoughts before the flood? No. It says that Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives lived. They didn't die. And Genesis 8:21 says, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. Listen, for the imagination of man's heart, the movies that play in his mind after the flood, is evil from his youth. In all these passages from Genesis, we're going to see how we think. The movies that we allow to play in our minds. Listen, the movies we allow to play in our minds will impact our relationship with God and others. The movies we allow to play in our minds uninterrupted will impact our relationship with God and others. Understand, it will impact, bad or good. The New Testament confirms this truth. 2 Corinthians 10:5. Now listen again, this King James Version uses the same word. Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Casting down the movies that we play in our head, and every high thing that we allow to exalt itself above God. And we bring in captivity those movies we're playing in our mind and make them obedient to Christ. God's telling us to take every imagination, every thought, every mental image, every movie that opposes him and cast it down. Put it in prison. Throw away the key. When we read the first 4 verses of this chapter, we see that God is contrasting walking by the flesh and walking by the Spirit. In other words, we will allow 2 types of movies to play in our minds. Number 1, they will be movies based on what we can see, hear, taste, feel, touch, smell. Or they're going to be movies based on what God said in his word. We need to have what I'll call faith-producing movies playing in our minds on a continuous loop if we want to resemble the life that Jesus Christ wants us to live. Faith-producing movies will enable us to defeat this enemy of our soul who desires to throw things our way so that he can get another kind of movie playing in our head. Because that's where all sin starts. Starts off with a thought, right? And that leads to an action. But it's got to begin here. We've seen what happens when flesh or sense-based movies play over and over and over in our minds. Now we're going to see what happens when a person comes to Jesus with this faith-producing movies in their mind and heart. We're going to read about a woman with an issue right now. She has an issue of blood, which is found in Mark chapter 5, verses 25 to 34. And this is what it says. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. We don't know exactly what all that is. We might have some ideas, but she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, and she had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in a crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt it in her body that she was free from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see, the people were crowding against you. You see the people crowding against you, the disciples answered, "And yet you ask us who touched you?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. When the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Now listen, and he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." Don't you feel bad for that woman? 12 years. I mean, as her physical body deteriorates, so does everything else around her life. I'm not sure that at one time in her life, maybe she was wealthy, but she spent all that wealth, and year after year of invasive tests, unsuccessful surgeries, it depleted her bankroll. She was penniless. She was poor, and being a poor woman in those days was really poor. And to make matters worse, she was unclean. That's what Scripture says. According to the law, the issue of blood made her unclean. She was forbidden any human contact whatsoever. She couldn't touch the furniture of another person. Leviticus chapter 15, this is where we get the law. This is handed down to the Jewish nation. When a woman has a regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during that period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. And here's the worst part. Every single incident involving the issue of blood made her unclean for 7 days. And she had been in this condition for 12 long years. And the law declared that she was unclean this entire time. So literally this woman, follow me, this woman had no physical contact with any other human being for 344 consecutive days. Can you imagine that? You can't touch anybody, nobody can touch you. For 12 years? In many ways, she's no different than a prisoner who's in solitary confinement. And you see, this woman has run out of options. But then she hears about this man named Jesus, and word is spread throughout her region that this guy delivered this crazy man that used to run around in the tombs and took him from a crazy person and made him sane. She's been hearing the rumors of this miracle maker, of this guy named Jesus, and what it's doing, it's developing a faith movie in her mind. Jesus is my answer. Jesus can kill me. And she's playing it. Jesus can do this. Jesus can do this. And she might have been thinking, you know what, this man, he was cutting himself with stones, he was crazy, but this man, Jesus, delivered them, and he's not roaming the hillside naked, raving like a lunatic, and they say he's in his right mind, he's wearing clothes now. And if Jesus could do that to him, he can heal me. And the movie's playing. You know, faith movies start with an idea that the impossible is possible. And I can see almost a smile on her face as she thinks about the possibility of being whole again. And she tears up as she's in the synagogue and she's praying to her God. And she's I believe Jesus can change me. I'll be able to have lunch with Hazel again. You know, she cries a little bit. And again, the movie is playing. Jesus can do this. Every day she walks to the town hoping to see Jesus. Every day she sees herself walking up to him, falling at his feet, telling him her story, begging him to heal her. And she's seen it in her mind over and over and over for days. This is the movie that she's playing. She's already healed. She's imagining it. She's thinking it. And the day finally arrives, and she runs to the door, and she hears all the noise and the excitement, and she hears the word Jesus, and she says softly to herself, I gotta get out there. And she runs out to the crowd, so large, and they don't see her, they don't notice it's her, and she's probably touching people, but she doesn't care now, you see, because Jesus is there. And she's unclean, and the woman realizes that she's not going to have a chance to talk with Jesus. She's not even going to be able to get that close, but she thinks, if I can just touch his garment, if I can just touch him, that's enough. And so she reaches behind Jesus, and she touches the hem as he walks by, and she's immediately healed. It doesn't say she went home and rested. It says immediately she felt something and she was clean. She was healed. And Jesus walks past the woman. She touches the fringe of his clothes, and she draws this healing power that she needs from him. And this whole issue of blood is gone. And this movie that's been playing over and over and over in her head has just now taken action. And Jesus says to her one more time, it's found in verse 34, he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. That was the faith movie that she had playing in her head. God, you're able. Jesus, you can do this. And she acted on it. That's part of what belief is. You see, we take God at his word, and we play that movie over and over and over in our minds. So, what movies are you playing in your head on a regular basis? Think about what you read in Scripture. Are they movies of you healing, of healing of a blind man? Are they movies of God feeding the 5,000? Are they movies, of you telling somebody who's caught in sin, go and sin no more? I mean, what are these movies? What are these movies that are playing in your head? Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 12, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. That's Jesus that said that. He said, whoever believes in me will do the works I've been doing, even greater things. But see, that word believe comes first. That's the movie that we're playing. Do you believe? Now, you can believe and believe and believe, and sometimes things just don't happen. That's when you sit there and you go, God, you're God. I think too often we kind of get it mixed up, and we've got this movie playing in our mind, and the movie actually is If I say I believe this, it will happen. Now that's pop culture. That's not what I'm saying here. If we believe in Jesus Christ, if we believe that he can do all things, then we believe that nothing is impossible with him, and then we always have hope, and that's what we ride on, but God is still God. But see, that's belief too, right? God, you're going to be the God. So I don't understand what you're doing right here, God. I don't understand why I'm still in this situation. I don't understand, but you're God. And I believe that you do all things according to your purpose for the good of those who love you. I believe that. That's the movie we're playing. That allows you to go on. There is a law that I use when I'm in driving instruction. So I teach driving, and I use the law of attraction all the time. The law of attraction is this. What you focus on, you are drawn to. So I'm constantly, in fact, I had a kid yesterday, I think I had to grab the wheel 20 times because that tree was dead on in front of us. And so I was constantly saying to him, okay, look ahead to where you want to drive to. Focus on that. And he would do that for a little while, and then all of a sudden he'd start looking around, and sure enough, he'd start looking around, or he'd look at that white line to the right, the one that you don't want to cross over because there's trees and boulders and things over there. And he would kind of focus in on that. And part of it was my own fault, as I said, watch the right, don't go to the right. Well, what do you think he's doing now? He's focused on the right. So he's going to be drawn to it, and he was. In 1978, I became focused on becoming a good basketball player and playing basketball in college. I had loved the game in high school, but I was very short. When I tried out my junior year, I was about 4'11", and the coach just said, son, you're just too little. And took the wind out of my sails. But when I got to college and I had grown 8 inches, I decided that I was going to be focused on becoming the best basketball player I could be. And because of that, I would go out, I would practice every day, I dedicated myself to the game, and ended up playing in a D2 college for several years. And then after college, found Christ, and I began to focus on him, and God then allowed me to take my focus of basketball and focus on him and put them together, and I became part of a team called Sports Ambassadors, and we went to the Philippines for the summer. We traveled around and played their local and national all-star teams, and then talked about our relationship with Jesus Christ. What an amazing experience. 25 years ago, I became focused on this beautiful woman that came to a retreat that I happened to be running. And I found myself drawn to her and wasted no time in asking her out on a date and asking her to marry me after that, and she did. You beat that. Now we have 5 children. I find myself still focused on her, but there's the law of attraction in operation. Whatever you're focused on, you're drawn to. Now, why am I going into all this? Because how does this relate to Genesis chapter 6, Dave? Where are you going with this? A lot of dangling lines. Here's one. Verse 5 in chapter 6, and God saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. The people's movie they were playing, or the movie that these people were playing in their mind, the thing that they were focused on, they were drawn to. See, their mindset was intent on evil, not good, and they allowed it to play uninterrupted, and it culminated in action. They were thinking bad thoughts, so they reaped what they sowed. Isn't that what we're told? Galatians 6, 7, 8. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. The man who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature he will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from that Spirit will reap eternal life. What movie theater are you hanging out at? Is it one to please your desires, or is it one to please God's desires? You and I, listen, we control what we're playing in our minds. We control what we're playing in our minds. Sometimes we have to be a little persistent with it. If you're filled with hate towards somebody, then that's the movie that you're letting play in your mind. It's amazing when you don't like somebody, how much you can see that is bad and disgusting in their lives. Even the way you they breathe is going to irritate you and you're going to find something wrong with it. And on the other end, if you choose to play the movie of loving people, then suddenly what happens is, because that's what Scripture says, love covers a multitude of sins, right? Suddenly, now you find yourself praying for them and desiring God's best for them. Why do you think Jesus tells us to pray for your enemies? Because that's the movie we ought to be playing. Not hate them, love them. Yes, they're doing bad things, but love them. If you play that movie of being the judge, then you will judge. And here's the scary part of it. God says to us, in the same measure that you judge others, you will also be judged. Now that ought to scare some of us. Because some of us, we can be pretty judgmental. And God's saying, yeah, same measure that you judge others, you're going to be judged. That scares me. And our judgment is based on our perception, not on God's. And how often is our perception wrong? Is that the movie that you're playing in your mind? Is the movie that we're playing in our mind too, if it's based on our perception, ouch. Ouch. That's a bad movie. Turn that one off. Change to another channel. Here we are, the conclusion. Romans 12, 2 and 3. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. The battle is always and has always been in our minds. Now here's the question. You and I, especially if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, you have the ability to choose the movie you're watching. We can turn the channel. We are not with our hands behind we're not tied down to watching this one channel that we don't like, that's making us a toxic person. We can change the channel. We have a choice. Now, as I say this, understand, this is tough stuff. And yet I am 100% convinced that this is one of our root problems, is we choose not to turn the channel. We choose to play that movie. And we rehash things over and over and over in our minds, and we can't get free from those thoughts. We can't get free from those thoughts because we have chosen to dwell on them. So change it. It feels weird, especially if somebody's done something bad to you and you're kind of nursing that grudge and rehashing it. See the movie? The movie's playing. It's playing. What's going to happen to me? I'm not going to be a nice person. It's not helping me. Now, if I change the channel and suddenly start thinking about God, part of me feels bad that I'm not watching this movie. You ever been there? Okay, God, I need to think about you. Okay, God, I'll think about you. Yeah, but okay, God, I'll think about you. Oh, yeah, but remember when they did? But what do you keep doing? You're intentionally allowing yourself being drawn back here because that's your choice. We have the ability to say no to sin. Jesus tells us that. And yes to him. But we have to turn our minds upon heavenly things. And what does it say? And the things of earth will go strangely dim. It is a matter of us choosing to put in here what we need to. Now, this is going to be an ongoing struggle, but we need to remind each other. We need to look each other in the face and say, what movie are you playing? What movie have you been playing this week? That's all we need to do. Yeah. I'm going to close with this. My friend and I, Tom, he's had a big impact on me in helping to lead me to Christ. And so he and I, one of the things that we used to say to each other is as soon as we got on the phone, hey, Tom, how you doing? How's the Lord? How's the Lord doing today? And how's the Lord doing today? Well, I know what he meant, and he knows what I mean. Have you spent time with him? Have you been talking to him? That's what we need to do to each other. Because those movies, too often we become very comfortable with them and we gravitate back to them. And here's why, because we have evil in our hearts. It's in our DNA. And if we're not conscious about playing the right movie, we're always going to be drawn back to the Bible. Always. And it doesn't stop until we see Christ face to face. That's why we need each other. That's why we need church. That's why we need to do this each week. Remember the cross, because God gave us the ability to say no, because Jesus said yes. Let's just close in a word of prayer. I'm going to ask if Nick and Pete can come up, and we're going to distribute the items for Lord's Supper this morning. But pray with me. Father, we just thank you for your word. And we thank you, Father, that you've given us the ability to be able to choose. And I pray, Father, that we can choose to no longer be committed to the pattern of this world. And Lord, we ask that you would transform us by renewing our minds, that you would remind us, Father, each day that we need to play the right movie, that we need to play a faith-based movie. And Lord, I just pray that you would cause us to question those things that we're playing in our heads on a regular basis, and to take captive every thought and make it obedient to you. Father, help us to remind each other of this. Help us to encourage each other in this. In Jesus' name.